There is one thing that museums dislike talking about. Most of our historical memory is held together by a few convenient images. When you gather these images side by side, it becomes painfully obvious. We've simply been painted a picture of whom to pity and whom to despise. In this story, the canvas matters more than the archive. Honestly ask yourself, do you remember history, or do you recall it as snapshots from paintings? The vast canvases depicting Peter, Sophia, Yermak have long become the main illustrations of the past, even though none of us was there. If visual art is the television of the 19th century, then who and why wrote the scripts for it? In the 19th century, painting was more than just art. It was the primary media platform through which power projected its images and narrated history. Without newspapers, cinema, or television, these large canvases with carefully staged scenes became the screen on which perceptions of the past were formed. The Peredvizhniki artists, often seen as defenders of truth and the people, were in fact part of this system. They didn't just depict events, they created images that served a specific idea and perspective. Think about it. When you see Peter I, you don't just remember dry facts. You recall paintings where he is portrayed as a great reformer, decisive and commanding. But who decided that he should be seen this way? The image of Sophia on the canvases balances between a stern political figure and a tragic heroine. The artist didn't just paint her face. He molded her character, chose her pose, light and shadow, creating a mask. Ivan the Terrible, Alexei Mikhailovich, Yermak. All these characters, seemingly alive and familiar, are the result of carefully constructed images. They are not just illustrations, but powerful tools for shaping public consciousness. If painting is media and the artist is a screenwriter and director, who controlled the process? Who decided what story to tell and how to portray the ruler? This isn't a matter of taste or style. It's about control over perception. The manipulation is subtle and often unnoticed. It seems we choose how to remember the past ourselves, but we have long been reprogrammed by these images. This is a serious discussion about how historical memory is formed. It's especially interesting that we perceive paintings as truth. But what if behind every image lies a hidden script? Who dictated to the artist what should be in the foreground and what in the shadows? Why did these particular images become canonical? If painting is television of the 19th century, who was its editor and producer? Who governed what we see and how we perceive it? We tend to think of the Peredvizhniki as fighters against official propaganda, voices of the people. But what if their work was also part of a larger game? The collaboration with the satirical show we'll mention later, a contrast that helps us grasp the complexity of the question. On one side, the seriousness and authority of the image. On the other, irony and doubt. But even irony doesn't negate that these paintings are tools of influence. What do we really know about our historical heroes? Where do their images, which we consider undeniable, come from? Who decides how you will see Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, or Menshikov? If painting is media, who controlled its agenda? Doesn't it seem that behind these questions lies more than just art history? Perhaps we live in a world where the past isn't what actually happened, but what was shown to us. And if that's the case, we should ask, who and why wrote the scripts for this television of the 19th century? We are often told that an artist must be hungry, free, and honest. But when 25,000 rubles from the imperial treasury are paid for Suvorov's Crossing of the Alps, freedom takes on a very different shape. Here, what matters is not what truly happened, but how the legend should look. Suvorov's Crossing of the Alps isn't just a painted scene. It's a commemorative commission, timed to the centenary of the campaign. A commission that tells a story not so much as it creates the desired image. It would seem simple, depict a hero leading soldiers over mountains. But that's where the intrigue begins. The official narrative shows Suvorov as a 69-year-old veteran, not just commanding, but sharing the hardships and dangers alongside his men. He's mounted, amidst the chaos, like a young general in his prime. But is that realistic? Imagine, Nearly 70, a general in the midst of a storm, galloping along narrow Alpine paths. It sounds like an ideal image, but not a historical fact. Doesn't it seem more like an artistic device than documentary accuracy? Visually, the painting is a still life of catastrophe, where every element serves dramaturgy and effect. Suvorov on horseback isn't just a figure, he's a symbol. The raging elements, exhausted soldiers, rocky slopes, all arranged to evoke admiration and awe, not doubt. What pays for this image? Historical truth, or a beautiful legend meant to be etched into the memory of the people and the museum? Speaking of money, it's worth noting that Nicholas II personally purchased the painting for 25,000 rubles, an amount comparable to many nobles' annual income. This isn't just an art purchase, it's an investment in a myth that works for the state and its ideals. The artist, often portrayed as hungry and free, turns out to be a well-paid creator of official history. Freedom here is a conditional concept, limited by the framework of the order and the expectations of the patron. And the key question? Can we trust an event if it looks like a carefully staged still life? If every stroke is subordinated not to truth, but to aesthetics and ideology? If the artist isn't a witness, but an actor playing a role scripted by someone else? This dissonance breeds distrust and irritation. A myth, no matter how beautiful, should not obscure reality. In the end, the hungry artist becomes not a creator, but an instrument of power. His brush is paid large sums to craft convenient and advantageous images. Freedom turns into an illusion, honesty into a rehearsed legend. Can such an artist be considered free? Or is he merely a craftsman selling not truth, but myth? What matters more, truth or legend? Should we accept as historical fact what merely appears as a perfect frame designed to evoke admiration and awe? The questions are simple, but the answers are complex. Hidden within this contradiction lies the true story of Suvorov's crossing of the Alps. When you hear the name Menshikov, your mind doesn't conjure a grand portrait, but a cramped hut with fading hope. Surikov once painted him in Berezovo, and with that single image, he sealed the entire biography of the most luminous prince for many generations. History is complicated, the picture is simple. Yet it is precisely simplicity that wins the battle for memory. Menshikov in Berezovo is not just an image of a man in exile. It is a carefully crafted symbol, a prince in a poor hut, surrounded by family, in an atmosphere of despair and submission. There is no hint of former luxury or political power. Everything suggests that the hero has accepted his fate and faded into the shadows. Icons on the walls, lamps, a book in his hands. Not random props, but symbols of repentance and spiritual cleansing, emphasizing the image of a humble Christian. But why did this particular image become fixed in our memory of Menshikov? The official story sounds simple. A favorite of Peter, deprived of everything, exiled, he built a house and a church, as if telling the world, he started simply and he will end simply. It seems to be a story of humility and a lesson for those who fell from the heights. But if we look deeper, a question arises. Is that really the whole truth? Why don't we see Menshikov as the architect of imperial policy, a man who shaped the destiny of the country? Why is his image reduced to a poor hut and faded eyes? The historical context complicates matters. The exile of 1728, his death a year later, his grave washed away by a river. It sounds like an ending from which no trace remains. But why, a century and a half later, in the 19th century, is this story suddenly remembered? Why does the need arise at that moment to fix Menshikov in this particular light? Doesn't it seem like a convenient lesson for subjects? A lesson of humility and submission with no room for pride or protest? The role of artist Vasily Surikov cannot be overstated. He didn't just capture a moment. he chose the only emotional angle that has stayed with us. His painting became a symbol, overshadowing all other aspects of the prince's biography. But who and why decided that this image should dominate? Why do we see Menshikov only as a broken exile, rather than a complex, contradictory figure, an integral part of imperial politics? This simplicity, which wins in memory, is a carefully constructed illusion. An illusion that hides real questions about Menshikov's biography, replacing a complex personality with a pitiful image. Isn't it too convenient that only the lesson of submission remains in memory? Isn't it too easy to forget that behind that poor hut lay years of power, intrigue, and influence? In the end, what we see is not a portrait of a man, but a portrait of an era that needed a story about humility and punishment. Stories without doubt or complexity, with a simple, understandable image. But if that's the case, what are we losing? Taking this image as the sole truth? Isn't it time to see Menshikov differently? Not as a broken figure, but as a person with a far more complex and multifaceted biography. For most, the executions of the Streltsy are not just dates and documents, but a vast canvas filled with tense faces and a heavy sky over the Lobnoye place. Surikov has cemented in our memory. It is here that Russia learned the mechanics of mass repression. Was this place truly a scaffold? That's less important now. What matters is that the painting was believed. The morning of the Streltsy execution is not just a 2x4-meter canvas. It is a visual benchmark of Peter's Repressions, a measure of the cruelty and scale of those events. Surikov poured into it not only the drama of the moment, but also symbolism that became a historical canon. But how well does this canon reflect reality? Fact: in 1698, over 1,300 Streltsy were executed. The scale of this tragedy is hard to overstate. But where did these executions take place? Why did Lobnoye Place become associated with them? Historical records do not confirm that Lobnoye Place was a site for mass executions. More likely, it was used for public announcements and ceremonies, not for mass death sentences in such volume. Still, Lobnoye Place firmly entered the collective consciousness as a symbol of the scaffold. Why? The answer lies in the power of the image. Surikov focused not on politics, but on the emotional scene of punishment, on tense faces full of fear, on the heavy sky pressing down on everyone. This shift of focus from politics to human drama made the painting a powerful emotional anchor. Interestingly, this very image became so significant that Tretyakov bought the canvas and included it in the National Gallery. This is not just a recognition of artistic value, but an assertion of a particular historical narrative. Through this painting, we perceive the Streltsy executions as the beginning of mass repression in Russia, comparable to the later Stalinist purges. But how fair is this comparison? Stalin's repressions were a systematic terror, affecting millions. The Streltsy executions were an episode in a struggle for power, involving a specific group. Comparing them as markers of violence simplifies and devalues the complexity of history. Yet that is exactly what happens. One powerful image turns into a symbol of an era, erasing nuances. Why do we remember the Streltsy executions not by archives, but by a single painting? Who designated Lobnoye Place as a symbol of public execution, if, historically, it was not? Are we turning a complex history into a convenient poster that's easier to accept but distorts reality? This question is especially crucial when it comes to mass repression. Surikov's painting teaches us to view history through a lens of horror and fear, but not through analysis and understanding. We are raised on images that capture emotions but erase context. In the end, Lobnoye Place became not what it once was, but what we chose to see in it. It turned into a symbol of the scaffold, even though historically it was not. And this symbol was reinforced not by facts, but by the power of an artistic image. So what do we really know about the Streltsy executions? Are they a historical fact, or an emotional myth? Are we relying too heavily on visual metaphors, neglecting documentary accuracy? Perhaps it's time to reconsider what we accept as truth and ask ourselves, have we oversimplified a complex history for the sake of a single, powerful image? In the halls of the Russian Museum, Yermak with his raised hand confidently leads Russia into Siberia, as if everything happened exactly that way and no other. Chronicles, ethnographic fantasies, and imperial money converge on a single canvas declared a national treasure. When a painting sells for a record sum, challenging its version of history becomes uncomfortable. At the center of this story stands Vasily Surikov's Yermak's Conquest of Siberia, showcased at the 23rd Exhibition of Wanderers. It's not just a painted scene, it's an event that immediately captured the attention of the public and critics alike. The canvas became a symbol around which history, politics, and art intertwined. But what exactly do we see on this canvas? In the middle, Yermak in chainmail and a traditional hat, embodying strength and determination. Around him, chaotic troops trying to resist the nomadic tribes of Siberia. But how realistic is this depiction? Surikov's army of Kuchum, as shown, is assembled from various ethnic groups, Chukchi, Aleuts, and other Far Eastern peoples. A strange mixture. These peoples lived far apart and probably couldn't have united into a single army. Where did this ethnographic potpourri come from? Surikov's inspiration came from Chronicles, including the Kungur one, which the artist called one of his main readings. But Chronicles are not documentary records in the modern sense. They are more like legends filled with myths and exaggerations. Why were these sources chosen as the basis? Possibly because they created a convenient image of enemy and hero for the national narrative. The composition of the painting is not just an artistic idea, but a carefully crafted story designed to evoke admiration and pride. Yet, there's also an element of fantasy. Why are representatives of such different cultures depicted in a single frame? Doesn't this resemble ethnographic fantasy rather than historical truth? Questions about the authenticity of the plot and ethnographic accuracy remain open. But another aspect is equally intriguing, the financial side. The deal with Pavel Tretyakov, who bought the painting for 40,000 rubles, set a record for Russian painting at the time. It was an enormous sum, rarely paid for pictorial works. Tsar Nicholas II's intervention in the deal indicates that the painting held not only artistic but also political significance. Why did this version of Siberian conquest gain the status of a national myth? Why was so much money paid for it? Perhaps because it perfectly aligned with imperial ideology, shaping an image of Russia as a power that explores and unites vast territories. This painting became not just a work of art, but a symbol, a national relic embedded in the Russian Museum. But what are we buying along with this canvas? An easy myth of conquest, hiding the complexity and ambiguity of real events? How historically accurate is the army of Kuchum, assembled from a motley crew of exotic types? And why did this version of the battle become the canonical one? Are we perhaps too quick to accept it as truth simply because it was paid for with a record sum and has become a national symbol? Ultimately, the conquest of Siberia by Yermak is less a historical document than a cultural construct, where chronicles, ethnographic fantasies, and political ambitions intertwine. This construct continues to influence our perception of history, making us doubt whether we truly know anything about the conquest of Siberia. In the Boyar Morozova and Nikita Pustosvyat, Russia's divisions are depicted long before you even have time to think about it. On one side, fanatics, fools, heretics. On the other, confident clergy and the authoritative Sophia. The artist does not aim to clarify, he pushes. Here is what is normal, and here is madness. The Boyar Morozova is a colossal canvas measuring 3 by 6 meters. The scale is no accident. It screams that this protest is a grand, almost epic event. Every centimeter is filled with meaning, every character a symbol. The Old Believer Rebellion is portrayed as a mass movement, yet the space is divided into us and them. On one side, vivid theatrical fanatics. On the other, silent but resolute representatives of authority and the church. Particular attention is drawn to the city fool with chains, repeating the double thumb gesture, a sign that has become a symbol of correct faith. This character emphasizes the myth that this gesture is the only true one. Why this gesture? The artist does not merely depict, he imposes a perspective. This fool is not a madman, but almost a prophet, whose double thumb becomes a measure of faith and belonging. In Nikita Pustosvyat, Peredvizhniki reveals another facet of the church schism, but with the same principle of visual division. The Tsar's chambers, a symbol of authority and the official church, become the arena of a debate that seems equal. But the space is fractured. On one side, Tsarevna Sophia and the double-headed throne, symbols of centralized power and correct religion. On the other, mad heretics, whose faces and postures evoke pity or mockery. This opposition is no coincidence. Peredvizhniki does not merely record a moment, he draws a clear line between us and them. The mad heretics are lost souls. The clergy, embodiments of dignity and strength. The question is, do you genuinely choose a side in this dispute, or has it already been drawn for you? Can you seriously hear the arguments of the defeated side if its image is predestined for mockery and contempt? Both paintings were purchased by Pavel Tretyakov and incorporated into the official canon of Russian art. This is not merely a recognition of artistic value, but an affirmation of a particular interpretation of history and faith. Tretyakov, shaping the national canon, fixed for the viewer a ready-made stance. There are right and wrong, worthy and mad, ours and theirs. Art becomes a tool for shaping public opinion and controlling collective memory. What do we see? Not merely a story of division, but a carefully constructed visual polarization. Artists leave no room for doubt or nuance. They push us toward a choice that has already been made for us. Why are some characters portrayed as madmen, while others embody dignity? Who sets these standards? What happens to those who don't fit into this rigid framework? Ultimately, these paintings are not neutral witnesses. They are instruments that shape perception, guide emotions, and reinforce social and religious norms. The question is, how much of our stance do we choose ourselves, and how much is imposed through visual images? Can anyone seriously consider the arguments of the defeated side after such pressure? Or has the split in the viewer's consciousness already occurred, leaving only the acceptance of the polarization offered by the artists? Princess Sophia in our imagination is almost always from a Repin canvas. Wide eyes, heavy face, loose hair, and monastery walls around her. Her political biography dissolves, leaving an image of a broken and dangerous woman. Several successful paintings have transformed a living person into a symbol of female power pushed to the brink of ruin. The image of Sophia in art begins with Vasily Perov's painting. Here she wears a crown, but not as a triumphant ruler, rather as a figure caught between two thrones, Peter's and Ivan's. The double throne symbolizes the split in authority and the atmosphere of chaos that weighs heavily on the heroine. Loose hair, usually a sign of chaos and loss of control, here signifies inner turmoil and vulnerability. Why did this particular image, the crown and tousled locks, become dominant? Why did the artist choose symbolism that emphasizes tension and instability rather than strength? If Peredvizhniki can be called the architect of Sophia's image as a strong yet vulnerable figure during Moscow's time of troubles, then Repin's painting adds a new layer: imprisonment and madness. In his canvas Tsarevna Sofia Alexeyevna in Novodevichy Monastery, we see not a political actor, but a captive whose power has been completely broken. The monastery walls, the heavy gaze, the almost painfully tousled hair create the impression of a person who has lost support and hope. But more importantly, Repin links her image to the tragic events that followed. The text accompanying Repin's painting ties Sophia to the execution of the Streltsy and the torture of her servants. This is no longer just a portrait, but a story of fear and cruelty, weighing heavily on the princess. Why amplify her image through suffering, defeat, and violence? Why are such episodes chosen to visually cement her character? Sophia's political biography is richer and more complex, so why do we almost never see it? The chronology is also crucial. Sophia's coronation in 1682 marks the beginning of her power, when she was effectively regent. Yet, alongside this event in art, the year 1698 is invariably depicted, her imprisonment and fall. These two key moments are woven into a single emotional narrative, creating a powerful visual and symbolic dichotomy, where triumph gives way to defeat and power to helplessness. Such a pairing creates an atmosphere of inevitable tragedy, as if Sophia was doomed from the very start. Who decided, and for what purpose, that this particular dramatic ending should define her story above all? Interestingly, these paintings are not merely stored away in archives. They are actively exhibited in traveling shows and occupy a prominent place in the Tretyakov Gallery, the main repository of Russian art. This means that the image of Sophia, nervous, disheveled, dangerous, is no accident or forgotten detail, but a deliberately maintained and reproduced symbol. It shapes a persistent stereotype. As a result, we see not a politician, strategist, or regent, but almost exclusively a nervous, broken figure. Why do we remember Sophia not for her political decisions or influence on history, but for her tousled hair and heavy gaze? Who decided to depict her precisely in moments of weakness and defeat, rather than during her hours of power and strength? How many other women in history exist only as such painted figures, symbols of tragedy rather than real actors? These questions are not trivial. They prompt reflection on how art and history intertwine, creating images more powerful than life itself. Sophia is a vivid example of how a living person can be transformed into a convenient symbol, one that serves a particular narrative. This symbol is simpler and more comprehensible than the complex reality of her reign. But should we be satisfied with this image alone? For most, Ivan the Terrible is not the Stoglavy Sobor or the conquest of Kazan, but a bloodstain on his son's face and the mad gaze of the father from Repin's painting. A single emotional episode, amplified by censorship and fanatic violence, cemented the Tsar's image as an uncontrollable madman. History can be easily reduced to one terrifying frame. The scene captured by Repin in 1885, an episode from 1581, when Ivan IV strikes his son, Tsarevich Ivan. The full title of the painting is Ivan the Terrible and His Son Ivan on November 16, 1581. It's not just an artistic image, but an almost documentary record frozen in time. That date and episode became the main symbol of Ivan the Terrible's reign in popular consciousness. But why? Why choose this moment, out of all his achievements and reforms, such as the conquest of Kazan, the Oprichnina, or judicial reforms, as the defining one? Ivan IV's history is complex and ambiguous. He was not only a tyrant, but also a reformer, building centralized authority. Yet, in popular perception, these aspects are barely remembered. One horrific scene outweighs dozens of pages of dry history. The image was reinforced by censorship. In 1885, Alexander III banned the public display of the painting. It became the first in Russian imperial history to be officially prohibited. One might think that banning it would erase it from public view, but the opposite happened. Restriction fueled interest. People began seeking it out, discussing, debating. Does censorship serve as free advertising? The more something is hidden, the more alluring the forbidden fruit becomes. The purchase of the painting by Pavel Tretyakov also played a significant role. He didn't simply acquire it for his collection, he made it a matter of public knowledge. Thanks to Tretyakov, the artwork became accessible to a broad audience, and the scandals surrounding it fueled endless debates. Acts of vandalism, repeated in 1913 and 2018, only confirm how painful this image had become. Knife wounds inflicted on the canvas are not just acts of vandalism, but attempts to destroy a symbol that many find offensive or dangerous. But what do we really see? Are we perhaps too fixated on one side of Ivan the Terrible, his madness and cruelty? Ignoring the other facets of his personality and reign, we risk forming a one-sided image. Why did the murder of his son become the defining moment of his era? Why did this episode overshadow decades of reforms and conquests? Is history really so simple that it can be reduced to one terrifying moment? If we think about it, it is precisely this scene and its fate, ban, scandals, vandalism, that turned Ivan the Terrible into a symbol of Tsarist brutality. But what if this image results not only from facts, but also from cultural manipulations? Does censorship amplify the myth? Banned, therefore important. Damaged the painting, therefore it struck a nerve. In the end, we received not a historical portrait, but a powerful symbol, easily exploited for political and cultural purposes. What do we know about Ivan the Terrible beyond this scene? Do we see him as a complex individual, as a ruler who built an empire? Or is it easier to cling to the terrifying image, which is simpler to understand and doesn't require complex explanations? The question is simple, but the answer is more complicated. Until we take it seriously, the story of Ivan IV will remain just the story of one frightening frame, one that perhaps reveals more about us than about the Tsar himself. In the scene where Peter leans over Alexei in a heavy chair, there are no parades or salutes, only a family interrogation turned into a state verdict. It is from this painting that Goa enters both the history of jubilees and the history of traveling exhibitions. Here, painting is no longer just decoration. It makes the official version of the past emotionally undeniable. Goa's painting is not merely a work of art, but a tool of cold memory dramaturgy. It appeared for the 200th anniversary of Peter I, a jubilee that demanded not celebration, but an official version of history. Why was the scene of the interrogation of Tsarevich Alexei chosen, rather than triumphs of reforms or military victories? The answer is more complex than it seems. This choice transforms a family drama into a national tragedy, where the son symbolizes weakness and betrayal, and the father, a ruthless reformer whose will is stronger than feelings. Such a plot fit perfectly into the Jubilee narrative, where Peter was perceived not only as a reformer, but also as a stern ruler capable of destroying anything that hindered progress. The painting became a symbol not only of memory, but also of ideology, demanding strict order and obedience. In this context, Goa is not just an artist, but a co-creator of the official version of history, where personal and political merge into a cold, meticulously crafted drama. It is no coincidence that Pavel Tretyakov specifically acquired this painting for his collection. His interest was not solely rooted in its artistic value, but in the fact that the canvas became a key element in a new exhibition strategy. Tretyakov understood. Such works shape public consciousness, set the tone for discussions about the past and present. Moreover, Goa produced several repetitions of the painting, one of which was intended for the imperial collection. This indicates that the image of the interrogation of the Tsarevich was in demand and institutionally supported. Goa did not limit himself to the role of a solitary artist. He became one of the founders of the Society for Traveling Art Exhibitions, a movement that revolutionized the system of showcasing art in Russia. The Peredvizhniki took on the task of bringing painting to the broad public, bypassing academic institutions. How does this relate to the anniversary agenda? Very simply, the artists of the traveling movement found themselves at the center of official history because their works, including the canvas with Peter and Alexei, supported the state's ideological narrative. The group photograph of the Society of Traveling Art Exhibitions members is not just a commemorative shot, but a symbol of a new stage in the history of art and memory. The Peredvizhniki did not confine themselves to city galleries. They organized exhibitions across the empire, making art accessible yet simultaneously controlled. The shift from private paintings to an institutional exhibition system marked a transition from personal interpretation to a mass, officially sanctioned version of the past. The question arises, who controls the frame, the artist or the patron? Gay was a talented painter, but his work was part of a carefully crafted script for the Jubilee, where every detail served an ideological purpose. Can we consider the artist truly free if his canvas becomes a tool of state memory policy? Or is this no longer creativity, but cold direction, where art serves the authorities? And one more mystery. How coincidental is it that these particular artists, linked to the traveling movement, ended up at the heart of the official Jubilee narrative? Doesn't it seem that their participation was dictated not only by artistic considerations, but also by political objectives? The Peredvizhniki, positioning themselves as an alternative to academicism, in reality became part of the state machinery of memory. Ultimately, Gay's painting is not just a piece of art, but a powerful symbol that sets the tone for the entire Jubilee campaign and simultaneously marks the beginning of a new institute of traveling exhibitions. This is no coincidence, but a carefully thought-out strategy. The family interrogation of the Tsarevich transforms into a state drama, and painting becomes a tool of the official version of history, which cannot be challenged without risking undermining the authority and its narrative. On paper, the Peredvizhniki appear almost revolutionary. They left the academy, went to the people, brought living art to the masses. But in reality, the same names appear on professors' lists, they receive academic titles, and sell canvases to the emperor and Tretyakov. The rebellion fits perfectly within the framework if the framework itself is dictated by the system. The charter of the Society for Traveling Art Exhibitions articulated noble aims: to enlighten the provinces, to foster a love for art, and to facilitate the sale of artists' works. On the surface, these seemed like ideals opposed to academic detachment and elitism. But if the goal was truly to bring art to the people, why did the initial exhibitions take place within the halls of the Academy of Arts, with its official atmosphere and strict oversight? This was no coincidence. The Academy's premises symbolized authority and recognition. The Peredvizhniki, despite their proclaimed rejection of academic aloofness, began precisely there. Not merely as guests, but as acknowledged participants within the system. Key figures, Gay, Perov, Jacobi, and others, were already academicians and professors. They were not marginal figures, but part of the very structure they claimed to oppose. Can one consider a protest movement whose members are officially recognized and hold high positions in the academy as truly rebellious? If they receive titles and exhibit under the auspices of the same institutions, how independent was their rebellion? Or was it a carefully staged performance where the opposition played a role assigned by the system? The works of the Peredvizhniki were systematically acquired by the Russian Museum and the Tretyakov Gallery, main institutions shaping the official artistic landscape of the country. The protest that was supposed to shake foundations, in reality, reinforced them, filling galleries with images that suited and pleased the elite. The example of Valery Jacobi and his gestures at the court of Anna Ioannovna is particularly telling. The painting depicts the empress in an unflattering light, grotesque features and mocking irony. Yet nearby stands an idealized portrait of Catherine II, majestic and proper. What is the meaning of such duality? Is it not that critique and satire were part of a visual narrative that ultimately underscored the legitimacy and grandeur of the empire? If people's rebels created images that shaped history and authority, who truly benefited from their activity? The provincial viewer supposedly brought living art, or imperial ideology, which carefully wove protest into its fabric. The question is simple but uncomfortable. Was this opposition embedded in the system from the very start? If the Peredvizhniki, professors, academicians, favorites of major collectors and state museums, where is genuine freedom and independence here? Does the protest not turn into a controlled spectacle, where the boundaries are set by authority? Disillusionment comes from understanding that rebellion fits within the framework if the system defines those boundaries. The Peredvizhniki are not revolutionaries, but carefully selected participants in a game, whose role is to create the illusion of protest without disrupting the established order. Ultimately, we see not a rupture with the Academy, but its expansion and reinterpretation through the same people who shaped its visage. So who truly benefited from the traveling exhibitions? The provincial viewer seeing paintings in person for the first time? Or imperial ideology gaining a new tool for visual control and indoctrination? The answer is obvious, but therein lies the greatest mystery and deception of the people's art of the Peredvizhniki. When at the end of a video they suggest visiting Predsilmag for a proper Russian shirt, it's almost honest. Previously, a similar tactic was used to sell a genuine Russian story, only instead of a website, there was a traveling exhibition, and instead of merchandise, massive canvases with the right faces and gestures. The question isn't whether manipulation exists, but whether you notice it. The second half of the 19th century became a true boom period in painting. Artists delved into themes that once seemed too narrow or insignificant. Scenes of peasant life, episodes from recent history, portraits of ordinary people. All of this drew immense attention. Why then? The answer is simple. The Peredvizhniki took on the role of missionaries of a new history. They didn't just paint, they preached. Not in churches, but in provincial towns and villages, where cultural innovations rarely reached before. It was they who brought the word about the past to the broad public. But what is this word? Not dry archives or scholarly treatises, but vivid, expressive images. For generations, most Russians saw their history not through books and authentic sources, but through reproductions of these paintings. Thus, a visual canon was formed, which we have come to consider truthful and authentic. But what if this canon is merely a carefully constructed version, created for specific purposes? Today, we face a similar situation. Modern practices of packaging Russian identity, whether through clothing, merchandise, or souvenirs, continue that same tradition. They offer not just an object, but an image that is supposed to speak for us, emphasize belonging and uniqueness. This image is not accidental. It's carefully designed to evoke certain emotions and associations. The uniqueness of the product is not just a marketing trick. In the 19th century, large canvases were rare. They were created by hand, with great effort and meaning embedded in them. Today, the singularity of merchandise is a way to make it valuable, special, almost ritualistic. Why all this? Why are we so eager to accept these images? The answer is that they almost always serve someone's interests. In the past, imperial, state, ideological. Today, commercial, branding, cultural. The irony is that we continue to believe our eyes without questioning. Who is behind the image? How many times over 200 years have they rewritten history on canvas, and we accepted it as gospel? Don't you think that's a rather convenient way to manipulate mass consciousness? How does today's packaging of Russian clothing differ from yesterday's packaging of Russian history? Essentially, not at all. The only difference is in the mediums and technologies. Then, huge canvases impossible to ignore. Now, online stores and social networks, making images even more accessible and ubiquitous. The goal remains the same, to foster a sense of belonging, identity, and participation in something greater. But who exactly defines what this greater is? Are we ready to ask ourselves, who is behind the image we believe in? Or do we continue to accept visual images as a given, oblivious to the interests behind them? This is the core paradox. We want to see the truth, yet more often than not, we receive a carefully edited version. The Peredvizhniki were the first to do this on a national level. Today, this mechanism operates under new conditions, with the same techniques but different faces and goals. As a result, the images shaping our understanding of Russianness are not just paintings or objects. They are tools that influence perceptions of the past and present. If we fail to learn to recognize manipulation, we will be repeatedly sold a correct history and a correct identity. The question isn't whether we can oppose this, but whether we want to see beyond the facade to what is hidden behind it. Now, when you step into a gallery or flip through a textbook, you will see not only the faces in the artwork, but also those who commissioned these faces. If you crave another perspective beyond the frame, simply subscribe, hit the bell, and tell us which myths about the past resonate with you the most.